Welcome to the week number 2. We will talk about the value today.
Yeah, we wanted to spend one course really focusing on value. We feel like it's a fundamental part of image making, that it was worthy of really talking about what is value, the ways we think about it, ways to simplify it, and ways to really attack it. It's a fundamental part of image making that we really feel like sometimes it's easy even for us to gloss over. And so we thought it was important to really spend some time talking about it.
Yeah, over the years, both Robert and I have been doing a lot of color work professionally, and a lot of people say, like, how do you do color so well? But in fact, we actually believe that we are stronger at getting the values right more than the color. And we'll explain why, but the value is a huge component of color when you talk about color. So let's get into our class.
So we want to start talking about color where we left off in the last lesson, which is breaking color down into its main 3 properties. And a good way to think about it is to think about hue, saturation, and value. It's similar to when you open a hue, saturation adjustment layer in Photoshop. It's broken down into hue, saturation, and lightness. Lightness is another way to say value, or sometimes it's called brightness is value. Let's talk a little bit more about these 3 specific things, looking at an example from Ilya Repin. So this is a painting from Repin, and the first property is hue. So if you took a hue saturation adjustment layer and opened it and just slid around hue, you see it shifts from colors that we would describe as red, blue, green, yellow. Hue is often kind of what you would refer to if you were kind of the pure color that it is, red, orange, blue, green, yellow, is in reference to hue.
Okay, saturation is basically how vivid your color is. Another way to say it is chroma. Basically, higher the saturation, the more garish or the more saturated, the more vivid the color is. And without saturation, it is basically gray, black and white.
And looking at an image in just black and white isolates value. So value is a color without saturation, and there is no real hue here. And so this is purely us looking at the brightness of an image. Oftentimes black and white photography is a great reference, drawings are a great reference, or similar to here, just taking the saturation out of a painting, you can see the value structure of a painting. So talking about value specifically is what we're going to focus on in this lesson. There are 3 things we're going to try to cover in this lesson. One, overall, this is things to think about or things to pay attention to as you're paying attention to value. These are things that we find important in reference to value. 1 is finding a simple value structure. 2 is edges, paying attention to edges. And the 3rd one is something we call exposure, similar to a camera. We'll get more into all these ideas soon, but let's talk about simple value structure first.
Yeah, we really love looking at paintings with value structures that are sort of decisively separated into smaller number of value structures. And you can imagine sometimes when there's so many degrees of values, everything becomes too mushed, and we can't really see artist decisions being made. So let's look at Rembrandt's painting here, his early self-portrait, and you can see how he's using the dramatic lighting to describe this portrait with very, distinctly he's making a choice of light, dark, and the middle tone. And even here, it's beautiful, another painting by Rembrandt, but same thing. If you squint at it, you really can tell he has a highlight, middle tone, and a dark. Very simple. The value structure of that painting is like that, and you wouldn't lose anything because he definitely gets into subtleties within this simple value structure, but you can see that he's making a choice of light and dark and middle tone very distinctly.
So let's look at this image by Saul Tepper in Illustrator. Overall, saturation and hue can be very distracting when trying to find value. This is a great example of simplifying value. So overall, what we're kind of moving towards is really a 3-value structure, kind of darks, middles, and brights, just like Dice said. And if you look here and you squint at the images, I think squinting is probably the best way to really simplify and group values. If you really squint at this, there's a lot of abstract shapes that bleed from one to the next. So if you look at her dress, into a sleeve, and then until the light hitting the bottom of the other lady's dress, that's all kind of one abstract shape. And the woman who's sitting behind the shadow of the tree is really falling back into a dark shape. So, this is an essential part of image making, is learning how to simplify values so that it makes the image a little easier to read, I'd say.
Yeah, another painting by Saul Tepper. If you really squint at it, and again, it's a very simple value structure. If you look at all the darks turn into the same value, almost kind of most of the composition, lower half of the composition is one value. And of course, if you open your eyes, you can see the subtleties, but that's what makes this composition work, because he's clearly making a choice. It's not like small details all over the place. All the details fall into this 3 simple value structure.
So overall, we really want you to look at color, look at the world out there, observe things, squint at things, really see it for its value structure. In other words, its brightness and its relationship to each other, how dark is something, how light is something. But then also, we want you to take that idea and try to simplify it into 3 simple values. And that just means that pick a middle, pick a bright, and pick a dark. And then try to think of your images in that way. Let's get into a little bit how to simplify. So we're going to look at a Mead Schaefer painting here. Value oftentimes is evaluated kind of like this, on a scale of 0 to 10. 0 being black, 10 being white.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the challenge is, of course, if you have so many sort of middle range grayscale, that it could easily fall into this sort of, smooth but not really well kind of structured value. And if you look at this Mead Schaefer's painting here, you can really see he's making a decision to simplify the value structure. And you know exactly what's going on, but if you squint at it, it creates this kind of a very simple, big shape design composition.
So if we looked at this and pulled the color out, we have just simply a value study here. Let's start with the dark. So how do we start to pick into these 3 different groupings of kind of a dark, a middle, and a bright? The first thing is if we color selected out of this image, we'd be in the 1 and 2 range for our darks. And that's overall, all throughout. And so maybe there is where we'll start our darks, and let's just kind of say overall, our darks are landing on a 1, but it encompasses a 0 to a 2. And so in the image, let's just go ahead and block that all out. All the 0s through 2s become one simple shape, one simple flat shape. And then for the middle, and this is what's interesting about kind of trying to pick, it is about making specific decisions of, is a 6 a middle tone or is it a bright? Is a 3 a dark or is it a middle tone? It's really about how you want to create an image. It's really about how you're diagnosing, how you're thinking about processing what you're seeing. For this image, specifically, I'm looking at it, I decided to group things in this way from 3 to 6, felt like a middle tone, so that if we take that, block it all in, and fill that in, you'll see, for instance, the deciding factor for me was I really felt like I wanted her top arm, the top of her arm to fall into shadow, and her forearm to be coming into the light. So if I would have grouped 6 into, the brights, then her whole arm would have been illuminated. So things like that are kind of deciding factors for how to simplify. There's no really right answer.
Yeah. And I think this is really where you get to sort of stamp with your own artistic sort of identity in a way, because you are making a decision here. And artists that make decisive decisions, whether it's agreeable or not by other people, it is your decision. And if you make that decision, if you show that decision, your paintings will look decisive. And that speaks to people.
Yeah, so if we look at the image overall, we can see if we squint at this, it should have the same overall visual impact that the original image did, devoid of color, obviously, of hue and saturation, obviously. But if we can create images and think about things like this, actually making images that are detailed and kind of the full, what Mead Schaefer had in the end, is very achievable, I believe. All right, so that's simplifying value overall. Let's take a look at this other idea, edges.
Yeah, edges are tricky. Edges necessarily don't mean it's value. It's a part of value in a way. I mean, why we wanted to talk about edges here in the value section is that it affects your judgment of values tremendously, and we definitely want to make sure that we are conscious of, like when you're conscious of edges while you're painting, especially when you're dealing with their values. This is Anders Zorn, Swedish painter. He was a master at dealing with edges. Like you can see how some of his paintings, like figures or the objects are falling into the background, and things are kind of fading into another element, just like that. But you know exactly what's going on. He's basically, showing some hard edges versus soft edges very, very well.
Yeah, it's incredible because these are actually etchings. So these are not paintings, these are etchings that he's done. But you can see he's got this quality of lost and found edges and a good variety of them. Because it's also, picking edges is also about designing. So every aspect of painting is about designing, making choices of having a variety of edges, but also kind of judiciously making choices about where you're placing soft edges versus hard edges to kind of help guide the eye around. Here you have this, her shoulder is completely lost into the background. It's really beautiful, but it also, you really look at the cast shadow beneath her lower left arm because it's such a hard edge. So he's really got a beautiful contrast of edges all throughout designed. And obviously, too, what's great is that he also has simplified the values in the way that we've been talking about, if you really squint at this.
Yeah, so, you can imagine Zorn painting, squinting the entire time. Because if you squint at this, rough etching, it'll really come to life. It really feels like you're there watching this person.
Here's the painter Nikolai Fechin. And this is really an extreme example, I would say, of contrasting edges. He's really abstracted what he's saying. But what's great is, if you squint at this and you look at the edges and the contrast of edges, the edges are what's helping you to bring focus and where to look overall. Of course, a strong value structure as well, good color, good design. But overall, it's an interesting contrast of edges, lost and found, what he's choosing to bring out.
Yeah, when it comes to Fechin, because he painted a lot of these paintings with palette knives, he is really playing with this hard edge, sort of thick paint to his advantage. But like Robert was saying, he's controlling the softness and hardness of edges just to his advantage, even though he's using this kind of thick paint with palette knives. You can see some of the soft areas. If you squint at it, they just disappear into the surrounding colors. Whereas, they're definitely definitive choice that he made to create these hard edges, where he wants the viewers to focus on. And that's just incredible. Yeah, another Fechin painting. Yeah, this is an incredible painting of Fetchin's daughter. I actually met her a year before she died in New Mexico. But yeah, she is beautiful painting. But again, if you look at this portrait overall, besides her hands and her face, you really, everything becomes like almost like an abstract painting.
Yeah, and again, squinting at these images is probably one of the better ways to really also distinguish hard and soft edges. The lost and found quality of an image is kind of the poetry of some of the image making. So simplifying the values and then thinking about, specifically thinking about edges. I think that's part of it too, is like maybe not trying to take all of it on, but understanding what you're seeing and processing some of this stuff in kind of a way that you can break down and think about them independently. So just knowing that you have to simplify your images into simple value structures and then also thinking about edges, I think is a good way to start to approach some of these paintings.
Again, the reason why I wanted to bring up edges in the value lesson is that soft and hard edges can sort of deceive your eye perception of a value significantly. So look at this two squares next to each other, and one is hard edge square and the other one is a soft edge square.
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? When you look at these, if you really look at them, if you look at them kind of closely and you squint at them, one actually does feel brighter than the other. What's really interesting is that, in fact, of course, and I'm sure you guys know this, is that they're actually, in fact, the same value. Just edge treatment is kind of affecting how we see, how we perceive things. This is really important to keep in mind as you're finding groupings, I think, and as you're trying to judge what values are actually there. Just keep in mind that edges can affect the way you perceive values.
Yeah, that's why when you're painting, you have to constantly be squinting, because you could easily get deceived by hard edges or soft edges. And it's, at least for me personally, I would say like it took me for years and years, I think until really recently, that I started to notice that edges can actually influence my painting so much. And it's one of those things that you don't think about as much, but it's a huge component. Like when you want the values to be, your values to be strong and close to what you're seeing, edges must be paid attention to.